we always feel like we're sitting there in that check ride. Well, what does he want? Does he want this, or does he want me to do this? I just want you to fly the airplane and show me that you know how to fly the airplane safe and that you're in control of it. If you see something up ahead that you don't like, then take charge and say, hey, we're putting a pause on the check ride. I want to move over here because there's too many aircraft in this area. We're going to go over to a different part of the practice area. So, okay, great.
Hello, aviators. Welcome back to the Profile Playbook podcast, where we bring you the tips, tricks, hacks, and shortcuts to enable you to become a pilot faster and cheaper. I'm Sean Ritchie.
And I'm Mike Martin. And today we've got a great guest. We've wanted to get him on the show. We've been talking for a period of months, actually, to land this interview with Ben. And Ben's been a friend of mine for over 20 years. His background is extremely diverse and interesting. He's done almost every facet of the industry and then some. And he's going to be here to share with us some great knowledge to help you launch your career. So Ben's done a little bit of everything. So I'd like to introduce my friend Ben Roller, and I'd like him to start at the beginning to talk about his background, because I think it's valid. This video is going to talk about examining, and you've done a lot of that, but just to hear your background really gives you a lot of credibility. So Ben, welcome to the show.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks for aging me too there, that we've gone back 20 years. I believe your hair was actually black, and I actually had hair when we met.
Awesome. So start at the very beginning with your primary training. I think you did 141 like me, right?
Yep. At University of Cincinnati / Sporty's Academy there in Cincinnati, Ohio. Started there in fall of '95 in the aviation program.
Gotcha.
Graduated there with my CFI certificate in '98.
Okay.
And very gung-ho to kind of explore a new area, go somewhere else in the country. And I had aspirations. Sporty's had a flight school in Hawaii at that time. I really wanted to go out there. But I had met a girl 6 months before, so I ended up moving to where she was, which was Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
big I'm difference. Familiar with.
It's a very big difference between South Dakota and Hawaii.
That's what we do for love, though, right? And they are married, by the way, still, and have
still married. Yep.
So, what did you do out in Sioux Falls?
So in Sioux Falls, I just started flight instructing and worked my way up. Eventually, I became an assistant chief flight instructor. And the flight school in Sioux Falls started an agreement with South Dakota State University, which had a aviation program in the past, but it had closed down, and the university wanted to bring the aviation program back. And they needed someone to move up to Brookings, South Dakota, and start running that program there at the university. And I ended up doing that. So I helped start the program back up at South Dakota State University.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was a great time. Great university, great college town. Loved it. Was there for about a year getting it up and running and off the ground. And then a friend of mine called and said, hey, we've got a position open up at the freight department down in Sioux Falls. And of course, at that time, when you really want to go to the next level, if you want to go airlines, corporate, whatever, you need multi-engine time. They wanted that. So this was a way to get my foot in the door and start building some multi-engine time. So I ended up taking that job, and I'm flying freight in 310s and 402s.
Nice.
And basically what it is
in North Dakota or South Dakota in the winter.
South Dakota, yep. So I did a lot of Iowa as well. The big UPS jets, like 75s and stuff, would come into Sioux Falls in the morning. We unload it, we sort it, and it gets all the packages get put on little airplanes, Cessna 310s, 402s, all that stuff. And we start flying it out to the small little podunk towns all throughout North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, Minnesota. And I mean, that's how grandma gets her package,
That sounds like hard flying and great experience, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Was it all night
yes,
IFR?
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really where I learned how to fly hard IFR and what it truly meant. I mean, I can remember one time flying along and I'm building up ice. And of course, we had boots on the Cessna 310. And I'm thinking back to the days of my commercial training at the University of Cincinnati. And they were talking about, hey, you never want to blow the boots too early because you can create uh, ice bridging and this and that, and you won't get it all cleared off. And so you want to make sure you have like 2 inches. And I'm looking out the window with a flashlight at the wings, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, how am I to know what 2 inches looks like from here? And but yeah, you really learn what it's all about there.
Yeah,
Is
I
that
did
night
that
flying?
same stuff, Ben. And you're flying you got like 3 boxes, taking it out to the middle of nowhere for the one UPS truck they got in
Yep.
that town.
Yep.
And that single pilot night freight stuff I did for, I guess, a total of about 1,500 hours. In that time, I really learned how to be a pilot. Nobody's there to help you. You're getting
Yep.
yourself into situations 5 nights a week that I mean, I can tell you stories you'd think I'm making up. Like, there's no way
Yep.
that really happened and you lived. I'm like, well, yeah, I did somehow.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly right. And this was what, late 90s. So it was really, GPS was starting to become a big thing, but the airplane I had no GPS. It had no autopilot. So, you're hand flying everything. And yeah, you had to learn it all on the go. So,
Man, man. So you got your multi-time there and your IFR experience, and then where'd you go after that?
So I went to Masaba Airlines, which was a Northwest regional airline at the
Okay.
time. Um, I I've never really wanted to do the airlines. It wasn't like my career goal, like a
Right.
lot of folks. But at the same time, I wanted to see that I could do it. Could I cut the mustard? Because you heard of failure rates and things like this, and I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. And got on with Masaba, and man, I loved the airlines. It was a great time.
Yeah.
Met a lot of great people. Um, I mean, I flew with a guy who was a captain of Masaba. He was on the 1980 U.S. hockey team that beat Russia. And
Wow.
I met so many wonderful people and just had a great time
You
at the
flew
airline.
you flew that Avro, right? That little
Correct.
what a neat little airplane, right? Those 4 motors on that thing.
Yes,
That's
great
cool.
airplane. Great airplane. Wasn't fast by any means. Built for short field takeoff and landing capabilities, but it was a wonderful time. A lot of fun. The bad part of my career was that I started in uh, early 2001, and then of course September 11th happened.
Right.
I literally just finished my green line, just finished all training, was set to go out on the line, and bam, September 11th happened, and everything in our industry just froze.
Yeah. So before we get into that, one question, and this is pre 9/11. So we all know the market was really bad before or after 9/11, but even to get hired at Musaba compared to today, just as some inspiration from our young viewers, and you'll probably smile at this, but we get a lot of emails right now because there's some things, Southwest stopped hiring and Delta cut their hiring to 50% or whatever. There's still lots and lots and lots of jobs, relatively speaking, to back then. And people are like, oh, is this the end of the world? Just
It's softening up. The hiring's over.
Yeah,
Right.
should I not even get into the business now? Give our viewers an idea of what you had as far as experience and how hard it was to get on at Musaba at that point.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I can remember my former flight instructor walked my resume into his chief pilot at Air Wisconsin. And
Okay.
at the time, I think on my resume it said I had 480 hours of multi-engine time. And I had a
Jeez.
total time of 1,700 hours total time. And of course, I'm flying freight, so I'm building it at about 80 hours a week of multi-engine time.
Wow.
And he looked at my resume and handed it back to my instructor and said, tell him to reapply when he has 500 hours of multi-time. Or, I mean,
And that's PIC.
Yeah,
multi.
PIC multi-time. And I'm like, well, geez, I'll have that in 2 days. but I mean, they were that dead set that you had to have a minimum of 500 hours of multi PIC or they weren't even going to look at you.
Wow. Wow,
Yeah.
man. And we've got people now that, are complaining they have to get 700 hours of single engine time total to get
Right.
a jet job. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's a
So,
different world.
so 9/11 hits. Did you immediately get laid off?
No, I managed to. They did do layoffs, but I managed to stick around. But I'm basically the bottom guy, and I sat on reserve for about 3.5 years.
Mm.
And reserve isn't really a great life. You're just sitting around waiting for the phone to ring.
Where were you living at that time?
So we were in Sioux Falls at that time when I got hired, but I was based in Cincinnati, so I was commuting to Cincinnati. And once 9/11 happened, we just knew, okay, commuting's not going to work with the reserve schedule. So we ended up moving back to Cincinnati. So,
Gotcha.
and
Cool.
it makes a world of difference if you're on reserve, whether you live at your base or you commute. Commuters, that is a rough life to do.
That's the critical time as a new hire at the airlines. It makes or breaks everything. You drive yourself insane, not being where you're based and being on reserve.
Yep. Out of all the guys in my class, I can think of, I think there was 5 of us in my new hire class. I was the last remaining one at Mesaba. And it was all because I lived in my base. So if they didn't call me, I didn't care. I was still at home where everybody else commuting. If they didn't call you, you're sitting in a hotel room away from your family. So it made a big difference.
Wow, man. Okay. So how did that shake out then?
So just kept going along at Mesaba. And in 2005, Mesaba decided they were going to close the base in Cincinnati. They offered a voluntary layoff to start. They were going to do layoffs, but first, before they do them, they would offer for anybody who wanted to voluntarily do the layoff. And so at that time, since they were closing the base, I was going to have to commute or we were going to have to move. We were pregnant. My wife was pregnant with our first child, and the job opened up at Sporty's. They were advertising for a chief flight instructor at Sporty's, my old flight school. And I always loved instructing. And I said, you know what? Let me throw my hat in the ring for that and see what happens. And I ended up getting offered that job. So I took that job and took a voluntary furlough from Mesaba. So I was still there, still on the seniority list, and had rights to a recall, but went back to being chief flight instructor at Sporty's.
Awesome. So as a chief there, you did check rides and all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah, so this is really where I started getting into check rides. Is as the chief flight instructor, of course, you're given stage checks for the 141, which is just periodically flying with a student to see that they're progressing as they should, and the instructor's covering everything they should. And
because Sporty's is a 141 school, you got to do stage checks. Right.
Yep.
Awesome.
Exactly. So, and at that time, the gentleman who was my assistant chief flight instructor was Mike Pueller. He was also a designated pilot examiner in the area. And so he did all the check rides, the final check rides. Eventually, Mike took a position with the FAA. And when he took a position with the FAA, that opened up a DPE position. And the FAA offered that to me. And that's when I became a DPE.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
So we're going to do a deep dive into all this DP stuff. That's the highlight of the video. But let's keep going. I want to get to where you're at now, and then we'll go back.
So you were Ben. You were a DP designated pilot examiner. I for some reason you were an actual FAA employee though.
Eventually, yes, but not.
He's getting to that.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
At this time, so this would have been around 2006 or so. I was chief flight instructor at Sporty's and also a designated pilot examiner. And let's see, around 2008, that went on for about 2.5 years. Around 2008 is when, let's just say, me and the owner at the flight school, didn't necessarily see eye to eye all the time. I just felt like it was probably going to be time to move on. And sure enough, he agreed and let me go. And at that time, I'd already had my application into flight safety and ended up getting hired at flight safety and became an instructor of flight safety in Columbus, who does all the training for the NetJets pilots.
Wow.
So they were getting ready for NetJets was about to build a brand new building. They're about to get a whole bunch of new airplanes called the Cessna 560 XLS Plus. And so I went up there. I got trained in the 560 XL. Me and another gentleman were about to go to Wichita, which is flight safety's headquarters. We would get differences training for the new XLS Plus in that simulator. Then they would break that simulator down and bring it to Columbus, and we'd start instructing all the NetJets pilots in the new aircraft. And 5 months after I got hired at flight safety, NetJets said, never mind, economy's going the wrong direction. We're going to put holds on our new building. We're not getting the new airplane. And I'm sitting there going, uh-oh. And sure enough, flight safety said, yeah, we're going to do layoffs now.
Oh, boy.
That's the whole reason I got hired, was for that. So then I got laid off from flight safety. So this was now early 2009. And lo and behold, my friend Mike Pueller, who was now at the FAA, called and said, hey, we just heard we're going to hire one GA operations inspector. Would you be interested? I had never really been interested in the FAA, not something I was thinking about. But, you know, when you're getting laid off from a job, at this time we now had 2 kids. Wife was pregnant with the 3rd. I'm like, a job is a job. Yeah, I'm interested. Yeah. And I got hired with the FAA in 2009 and became general aviation inspector, was there for 10 years.
Wow.
And it was a very good job. The FAA is interesting, you know, to say the least. It's a government job, great benefits, great schedule. But there are frustrations working for the government. I don't think that's any shock to anybody out there. Right. The bureaucracy and just trying to get things done. There's so many just hoops to jump through. And I was still at a stage in my life. I want to work. I want to help people. I want to do a good job. I love aviation, and it was starting to grind on me. And my wife one day looked at me and said, "Are you even happy with your job?" I said, No, I dread going back into work. And she said, maybe it's time to look at going back to flying. And lo and behold, old friend of mine from 20 some years ago, they were looking for a pilot, and ended up getting hired on here where I'm at now, which is American Financial Group, flying a Falcon 900 and a Falcon 7X out of London.
And why'd you pick such an ugly airplane? Wow, what a piece of, that's a nice bird, man.
It is a bird. I absolutely love them.
Oh man, yeah, that's one of those planes you just look at and you're like, wow, that is that look. I don't know what that costs, but that looks really expensive.
Yes, and you know, after flying this, you know, there's not many 3-engine jets out there, and now I can say in my career I have flown a 2-engine, I have flown a 3-engine, and I have flown a 4-engine jet.
Yeah, I hear they fly as good as they look too, right?
Oh, they do. Oh, that 7X is just smooth. Oh, it's just smooth. Easiest plane I've ever flown. Just love it.
So I don't mean to hog the interview. I'll let Sean take over, but just to put a bow on that, one thing I was thinking the viewers might be thinking that, or aspiring pilots, like, man, this guy's had a lot of turmoil as far as the economy in his career. But two things I want to bring up. You had 2 catastrophic black swan events in your career, and one was 9/11 and the other one was the 2008 financial crisis, and you weathered the storm almost flawlessly. Absolutely. Right? So that's important to remember. Wouldn't you say, Sean?
Absolutely. Yeah, everybody our age, we're all 3 about the same age, and you know, all of us in this point in our careers have gone through those events, and some of us didn't make it. some of us aren't flying anymore. It was, that's what I thought when Mike, when you brought up the kids today, I call them kids, but the people today say, oh, the market's softening. Oh, the end of the world's coming. Delta cut their hiring from 300 a month to 150 a month. Whoa. They have
Yep.
no idea what we had went through where, 500 hours of multi-engine time. There's a line of 200 people out the door around the corner for the 25 jobs they actually have. It's still very much a different game than what we went through. And, but back to the whole point of having you on, Ben, I was so excited. Our viewers are primarily, folks working on their primary training, working their way up instrument, commercial. And Mike and I's job here is to bring them the intel to get through this thing quicker and faster and without any, rough edges, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
having an actual DPE, not only a DPE, but somebody who worked for the FAA on here, I think we
and
can
ran
do
a flight school.
Yeah, we can do the ask me anything that one of our people would never get to ask somebody that's worked in your position before. So we were just talking about it today on our coaching call. We do this coaching call weekly where the folks they get on and ask Mike and I questions. And we were talking about the shortage in DPEs right now.
Yep.
And I don't even know. I mean, I know you've been out of it for a little bit, but these kids going through training, especially with these accelerating schools, they're pumping them through lickety split, and then they can't find a damn examiner to take a check ride.
Yep.
So I was just curious if you had any insight into what's going on there, and maybe talk a little bit about what it takes to be a DPE. Maybe somebody's watching this that's kicking that can around thinking about it.
Well, I think the FAA, somewhere around the time I left, I think the FAA started putting a little more emphasis on their oversight of designated pilot examiners. I think they had maybe a couple incidences where they felt examiners were stepping outside their bounds or being too loose with the requirements in the PTS, or not what is now the ACS.
Right.
And so I think maybe a new regime came in and said, "Hey, we're going to tighten things down and put some more oversight on this." And there's really nothing wrong with that, but at the same time, how you implement that can be tricky. And I think what we've seen is just a lot of DPEs have said it's not worth the time and the money and the effort to do these check rides, because they've got the scrutiny from the FAA and they're putting more and more scrutiny on them and having to do more and more paperwork and things in the background that you as the student or the applicant do not see. Training, all sorts of stuff like that. And I think just a lot of the DPs just had enough and said, you know what, enough's enough. It's just not worth my time, effort, and energy anymore. So,
is there personal liability for that? Like, if you give a guy a license and then he goes and kills himself, can you personally be sued from that? Is that a concern or anything?
I think there are some people that have that concern. Yes. I mean, in today's world, it can be kind of a sue happy world. Typically, I would say the instructor probably has more liability there than the designated examiner. Keep in mind, the examiner is only seeing them one time, one flight. You're going to give them an oral exam that's going to be about an hour and a half or so, and then a flight that's about an hour and a half, 2 hours. That's all you've got with them. And if they're on their A game that day, then they're on their A game that day. So occasionally a bad apple can squeak through. So
what if I remember I was talking to you personally about this just 3 or 4 years ago, right about the time Mike and I started the Pro Pilot Playbook. I was talking to you about becoming an examiner because I saw it as another side hustle or whatever. Can you kind of run down some of the requirements? I know you need to be have current flight instruction in the last couple of years. You remember any of that stuff?
Well, they've changed since I left the FAA.
Oh, okay.
They actually have, yes. So, like I say, a new regime there at the FAA, and they have changed the requirements because I think you have to fly a minimum of 300 flight hours per year now. And there was a lot of DPEs, they didn't do that. They didn't meet those requirements. So when these new requirements went in, they're like, no, I'm not going to do that, because we had some
Right.
older DPEs that didn't necessarily fly. Some of them, being a DPE was their full time job. And in the FAA's eyes, the FAA never ever wanted a DPE to have that as their full job. This was always supposed to be
Right.
pilots in the airlines or the corporate world who do this on the side, not a full time career. And I personally, I agree with that. I don't think we want people who are doing DPE as a full time career, because that starts to put an emphasis on the money for
Yep.
them. That's how
Yep.
they're putting the food on the table for their family, and roof over their heads. And that starts to be, oh, I can squeeze another check ride in here. No, it should be about the quality,
Mhm.
not the quantity. So
Right. And I think you guys have restrictions on how many rides you can do in one day, right?
yes, they did. And again, those have changed as well since I was there.
Oh,
I mean,
Gotcha.
lots has changed in just the past 4.5 years since I left the FAA. So
gotcha. Who's the DPE's DPE? Let's say you're newly minted DP. I mean, how often are the DPEs checked for their DPE qualification, their
uh,
skills?
yep. So when I was at the FAA as a general aviation inspector, that was one of the things I would do. So
Okay.
you're assigned as a GA ops inspector certain companies that you work with, oversee. So you're their direct contact to the FAA, and the same thing with DPEs. They're assigned an inspector that's their direct contact. Um, and so it used to be that, like, once a year you had to go fly with that DPE. You had to sit in on an oral exam, observe them giving an oral exam. If possible, sit in the airplane while they give a check ride. That's not always possible. Obviously, some of the small aircraft you can't
Right.
do that. Light sport aircraft, things like that. Um, those requirements have also changed. The FAA came out with, just before I left, a new system called SAS. And they also came out with a new database for designated pilot examiners. So it used to be that an examiner was stuck to a certain region. They've lifted those borders now, and a DP in Ohio can go give a check ride anywhere in the United States he wants.
Oh,
So they've
really?
lifted those requirements, and all of that is because of this centralized database that they have. But in that database, it has what the inspector has to do as far as observing them, um, giving so many check rides. And now it's based on how many check rides do you as an examiner give. The more check rides an examiner gives, the more oversight they're going to get from the FAA.
Mm.
Instead of just once a year observing you give a check ride, I may have to do it once a quarter or once every 6 months. It just depends. How active of a DPE are you?
Are
So,
you ready for a hard question, Ben Roller? Are you ready?
sure.
Okay, so you bring
Uh-huh.
up the more oversight, the more you do and everything. Does the FAA look at the pass fail ratio of
Oh
the
man, I was going to ask this.
of these instructors? This is what everybody wants to know. And if you're passing too many people, they're like, this guy's too easy. He needs to
Yeah.
be looked at even harder,
Yeah.
because nobody can pay. You can't have 100
Right.
check rides in a row that are
The
passed.
secret quota, does it exist?
Right. No, not really. I would say it's kind of like everything in life. There's certain inspectors out there that probably do look at that and put a little more emphasis on that than
Okay.
other inspectors. Um, but as a whole, the FAA doesn't have a certain rule on that or a certain policy that, watch, if a person's pass rate gets above this, then you need to do that. To my knowledge, it's always it's there, but I think it's kind of up to each individual inspector how much emphasis you put on that. And
Gotcha.
I know, I mean, I had Mike Pueller, who was a great friend of mine. He was DPE for many, many years, longer than I was. Spectre at the Cincinnati FISDO. Um, he and I used to talk about questions like this. And I can remember when I first became a DPE and I'd call him and I'm like, do I need to be worried that I've had 10 in a row pass? Is that bad? Am I starting to, everybody know what my check ride is or something and they've figured me out and how to do it?
Right.
He's like, Ben, relax, take a deep breath. He goes, you're going to go through peaks and valleys. You're going to have 10,
Right.
12, 15 pass in a row, and then you might have 2 or 3 fail in a row. It just depends. He goes, but don't panic over it. Just focus on what are the standards and are you giving an honest, fair check ride? If you can do that, that's all that matters. So that's what I try to put my focus on.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
That's great.
I'd always thought, it's got to be a little bit of a, there's one thing for somebody to just blatantly, all right, this person doesn't having that ability to distinguish, is this person the obvious master of this machine, or is he it and he's just having a little bit of a bad day, or is this person a train wreck and he's trying to put a facade up for me,
Right.
because you could have two extremes of each end. That's one thing keeps coming up with one of our most popular videos we put out is that TN Fly girl and the YouTube stuff, the stuff she was putting on YouTube. This person was not the obvious master of that airplane. And it was so bad that the video we made on it, our perspective was this was an act. She's acting like a dummy. But of course, she actually crashed the airplane and killed her and her father. So, was it an act that went bad on her one day? I don't know, but it was, somebody gave her a pilot's license and did not use good judgment. So that's got to be tough some days, because you got somebody on the borderline here, he knows his stuff, but damn, why can't he just get this one thing for me?
Right. When I gave check rides, when somebody was really great and it was an obvious pass, okay, no problems. That's easy, right? And then you had guys that really messed up and it was an obvious fail. Okay, that's easy. But what you mentioned there, the borderline, the guys that are what we call the 70 percenters, right? Because you need a 70% to pass the knowledge test. They're right there on that bubble. They're not showing you great obvious mastery of the aircraft, but they're not horrible. They're not unsafe, but you just sit there and kind of like in the back of your mind, I don't know, and we have the ACS standards that the FAA comes out with, and the FAA tries to make it very black and white. But no matter what, it is always going to be a subjective opinion of that examiner on that day. Gotcha. Always. We can make it as black and white as we want, but it is always going to be subjective to that examiner on that day. And one thing I always said to myself is, okay, would I feel comfortable with my wife and kids getting in this airplane with you? Right. Because the last thing I want is somebody to leave with their private pilot certificate and they're all happy. Hey, and I'm going to take my girlfriend up for a ride the next day, and boom, they crash.
Oh, yeah.
That means I didn't do my job. And sometimes your job as a DPE is being that guy that says, no, I'm sorry, you're not ready yet.
Yeah. And that can be a big learning experience for those students.
Absolutely. Some of the best pilots I know failed a check ride. It doesn't mean you're a bad pilot. It just means at that moment you weren't ready. I was lucky enough to go through a 141 school that had the stage exams prior to you taking, your actual check ride with the FAA. I mean, if I didn't have those, I'm pretty sure I would have failed a FAA check ride. But because I had those, I failed those stage checks.
Yeah.
Right. And then went back and got the training I needed, so those found those gaps for me.
Right. So I see what you think about this comment. I always remember this. I was flying with a guy in a jet that had some, I think, 121, 135 check airman experience, and he gave tons of check rides, and we got in this conversation. And he's like, Mike, I pretty much knew after 5 minutes of talking to the student whether they were going to pass or not. He goes, not meaning I made a judgment at that moment,
Right.
but he's like, when they walk in and you start doing the oral, within 5 minutes, if you push pause, you could predict the outcome like 95% of the time. He was saying on the check ride. I don't know. Did you feel that way, sort of?
Yeah, you can definitely get a sense of which way it's going to go within the first 5 minutes. Yes. Occasionally, somewhere in there, they'll all of a sudden throw you for a loop, but normally, yes, you can kind of see where it's going to go. Yep.
So that probably segues. I'm going to steal this question, Sean, because you're already thinking it too. I bet is as a I'm thinking people on YouTube are going to look at this video because they're nervous. They got their check ride the next day, and
Yep.
they're looking at that for information. So based on that, and I guess first impressions are very important, but what advice would you give a pilot that's in that position? They're sitting right now in their home office watching this because
No
they got a
stage
check ride
checks.
tomorrow.
They're a student pilot working on their private. This is their first experience with a check ride. They don't know what they don't know going in here to this.
Right.
Well, I guess my advice to them would be, number one, make sure you have looked through the ACS, the Airman Certification Standards, that you understand what the examiner is supposed to be asking and the standards that he's looking for. So know that, but go in confident, go in wanting to be the pilot in command. We always feel like we're sitting there in that check ride. Well, what does he want? Does he want this or does he want me to do that? I just want you to fly the airplane and show me that you know how to fly the airplane safely and that you're in control of it. If you see something up ahead that you don't like, then take charge and say, hey, we're putting a pause on the check ride. I want to move over here because there's too many aircraft in this area. We're going to go over to a different part of the practice area. So, okay, great. That's really not, I'm looking for that aeronautical decision making that somebody just says, hey, I'm not comfortable with this. We're going to go do this. Okay, great. Because at the end of the day, after I'm gone, you are going to be out there flying this plane on your own, having to make all those little decisions. Don't rely on me. Just, what has to be done. You're going to go do slow flight. You're going to go do stalls. You know how to do them. You've done them a bunch of times. Just do them. Don't worry about, if he prefers this or that. So,
Gotcha.
Is there
the other thing I want to say, guys, for this is, I can remember when I went through school, we had certain DPEs that were known to be tougher than other DPEs, right? If you know of a DPE that has a certain reputation and it's not such a good reputation, and then don't go to that DPE. Sometimes the flight schools seem to push a person towards a certain DPE. If you don't like that DPE, you don't like the reputation, then don't go to that DPE. Find your own, because at the same time, you are spending your own money for this check ride, number one. And number two, it's not a rite of passage. This isn't a fraternity that they should be berating you to get into. It should simply be an honest, fair check ride. That's it. And so if you don't feel you're getting an honest, fair check ride, or you're not going to get an honest, fair check ride from that guy because of the things you've heard, then don't go to that person.
Right.
Go find
Excellent
somebody
advice.
who has a reputation of being an honest, fair person.
That actually just came up on our coaching call today. One of our people was trying to get a check ride down in South Florida, and all the examiners are taken up. So Mike, he actually stayed on the call after I got disconnected. He found a DPE from up in North Florida that's going to come down, and he was all concerned that it was going to upset the flight school or something like that if he brought this guy in. I'm like, no, just do it. But you're going in blind. You don't know this guy's routine. Your instructor isn't that's
Mhm.
typically, your instructor will prep you for that examiner because he knows all
Exactly.
his moves.
Yep.
But he can't jump off the script too much because the ACS is
Right.
there to, yeah. Is there something when concerning private pilots? Was there ever, did you do enough of them to have like a trend, a reoccurring theme of folks that had trouble with the check ride? Was there
Problem
anything that
areas.
stuck out for you? Or as an examiner, maybe I
Hmm.
should ask it this way, as an examiner, was there something that like a pet peeve or something you always felt
Uh,
personally made a good pilot? Like I got a couple things
Look
when
at
I
him,
fly with
look
a
at
new
him light up.
co-pilot. I can tell what's good and what's bad, Is
Right.
there
When you
anything like that
said
for
pet
you?
peeve.
um,
What was that, Mike?
Well, he lit up when you said pet peeve, so I know he's got
Okay.
something that pissed him off.
well, I see. Part of me would like to say, I hope I didn't have pet peeves because that's a failure on me as a DPE to have certain pet peeves. I'm sure I did. Thinking back to private pilot, though, um, I guess my biggest pet peeve is just when they're indecisive.
Mhm.
I just don't want you to be indecisive.
Like
Some,
asking you what to do and all that stuff.
yeah, yeah. Um, so, like for stalls, for example, of course, when we're doing stalls, you're showing me how to recover from a stall. But in order to show me how to recover from a stall, you got to put me into a stall. Is there is there a right or wrong way to really put yourself into a stall? I mean, if you're doing it at too low of an altitude, or
Right.
something like that, obviously, yes. But other than that, kids would get so hung up on the steps of putting themselves into the
Right.
stall. And I'm like, yeah, not really concerned with that. Let's see that you understand what a stall is and know how to recover from a stall. That's what I care about. So I just like them to not be too indecisive. Just, hey, I'd rather you make the wrong decision and then realize, oh, that's not working out. Let's do this now, than make no decision at all.
Yeah.
I've seen that like on a diversion um, where we start out like we're going on the cross country, and then I say, okay, you have this problem, blah blah, and they're like, well, I'm going to divert over this airport. I'm like, okay, let's do that. So they start diverting to that airport, and then they get lost, and they just get unsure of what to do, what decisions to make, or even on the diversion, I've had them look at me and go, well, I don't know. What would you like to do? Would you like to go to that airport, or we could go back to this airport, or we could go back to where we took off? I'm like, you're PIC. I'm not even here. You just do what you want.
Right. Exactly. What's the
Here's the
name of your
problem.
flight instructor?
So, you know, so I would say indecisiveness would have probably been my biggest pet peeve.
Gotcha.
So, because a maneuver, steep turns, just like the ACS says, you get off your altitude. Do you recognize it and make the corrective action? That is the
Right.
most important thing to me, because you are never going to fly a perfect check ride. I've never flown a perfect check ride. I've flown check rides that I'm sure, have been outside the standards. They probably could have failed me, but they didn't, because I made the necessary corrective actions to get back to it, and everything else went well. So don't think, that just one thing, getting off your altitude one time or something, is going to bother me. I mean, no,
Right.
it's all about those decision makings and getting back to it.
Yeah, I've seen
So,
that. We probably all seen it where, I've been in the simulator with somebody doing a type ride and they get 100 foot off on their altitude during steep turns and their whole day goes to shit
Yeah.
because
yep,
now they think they've screwed up and, they've lost it mentally.
right,
Yeah.
yep,
Is,
and
is
and and hopefully the DPE tells them, at the beginning of the check ride. Theoretically, the moment they fail, they should tell you, "I'm sorry, but
right.
that was satisfactory."
Yeah.
So if you don't hear those words, put it behind you and move on. It's kind of like
Right.
in sports. You're going to make a mistake. Put it behind you and move on. You still got the whole game ahead of you,
Yeah.
right? So I remember one time I was giving a special medical flight test. This is when I was with the FAA, which actually DPEs are now starting to get permission to do special medical flight test instead of FAA inspectors, because the FAA is hurting so bad for inspectors. But I was given a special medical flight test to a student, and one of the requirements was for him to do landings. Well, this was a student pilot who had never even soloed. He couldn't solo because he can't get his medical, so therefore he can't solo. And yet here I am having to give him a special medical flight test that requires landing. And he was all nervous about, well, you know, I'm still learning how to land. I haven't even soloed. And I said, take a deep breath, relax. I've been an instructor for years. I was a chief flight instructor. I know what a person at your level is supposed to be able to do.
Right.
I'm not looking for you to be, some professional pilot with 30 years of experience behind
Right.
you. You've got 15, 20 hours under your belt. I'm looking for you to be about a 15-hour, 20-hour pilot. And if you're doing that, then I know you're progressing the way you should. So,
Right.
and I'm mainly looking at whatever his ailment wasn't, causing interference with him learning to fly.
Gotcha.
So,
Very good.
when I was hired at the FAA, things we did in training was we had to give mock check rides, like private pilot, particularly CFI check rides, because that's usually what FAA inspectors did. And we did those in a group, and then your peers would, critique you on what you did. And I can remember one gentleman, he starts asking aerodynamic questions, and he gets very in depth, I thought, into aerodynamics. So we go to the critiquing part, and I said, well, I thought your questions went too in depth. I said, there's no way a beginning flight instructor is going to know the aerodynamics that in depth. And he was taken aback, and he's like, what are you talking about? He's going to be teaching people to fly. He's got to know aerodynamics like this and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I said, how long have you been flying? And he said, 35 years. And I said, okay. And you just retired from the airlines prior to coming to the FAA? And he's like, yes. I said, think back to when you were starting out as a CFI. Did you know aerodynamics that in depth? And if you say yes, you're lying. There's no way you knew aerodynamics that in depth. You've learned it over a 35-year career. We can't expect this beginning CFI to know aerodynamics the way a 35-year-old retired professional pilot does.
Right.
That's great.
And so other advice I have for people is understand they're not expecting you to be that 30-year retired professional pilot on your private pilot check ride. They're expecting you to be a private pilot. Yes, you're going to make mistakes. You are learning. So
was there ever a check ride that you hated given, or you disliked or liked more than another, like instrument versus commercial, private? CFI is probably an all-day thing. That one probably wasn't something to look forward to, I suppose, but
yeah, that was actually my question too. Yeah, and you could tie it in together. Is what check ride's the hardest, highest failure rates, and to like Sean said, that you dislike doing or whatever?
I would say CFI probably had the highest fail rate. That would probably be the one I like the least. I never, ever agreed with that it needed to be an all-day affair. And even people above me at the FAA said it should never take more than 5 hours per check ride. You need 2 hours for an oral. You need about 2 hours for the flight and some paperwork in there, something like that. But these all-day affairs for a CFI, I mean, as you mentioned before, the one guy said about 5 minutes in, I could see how it's going to go. Then why do you need to be there for a 6-hour oral?
yeah,
What's the point? You're just supposed to hit a little bit of each subject. And if they're, answering those questions, move on. If they struggle, then you kind of dig in a little bit to see, okay, well, how much are they struggling with this subject area? And then move on. And so the CFI is the one I like the least. I think it's the hardest to judge. but the instrument was by far the easiest to judge. An instrument check ride, either you know how to enter a hold or you don't.
Mhm.
Either you can follow the localizer course or you can't. I mean, that's as close to black and white of a check ride as you can get.
Right.
Because you know how to load and approach, you know how to follow the needles. That's instrument flying, right? So, and interestingly enough, one thing I saw for instrument, if you look at the FAA requirements to get an instrument rating, um, let's see, under Part 61, you're required to have, what is it, like 40 hours of cross country time or something like that?
There is cross country
Yeah.
requirements in there. Yeah.
Maybe it's 50.
I was going to say
very
50.
chunk of cross country time. But if you go 141, you do not have that requirement. That is dropped off.
Huh.
So now all you need is the instruction. So if you're doing 141, you get your private, you go straight into instrument. Whereas a Part 61 person has to go out and fly and get a bunch of cross country time and all that before they're able to take check ride. I found that Part 61 students that had that 50 hours of cross country time did way better on their instrument check ride than those 141 students that went straight into instrument and didn't have it.
Wow.
Because those guys are still learning how to fly the airplane. They're
Right.
still learning how to trim it. Where if you've gone out and done 50 hours of cross country time,
Yep.
you've been working on trimming the airplane and dividing your attention with passengers or whatever. And you can't trade that real world experience.
Right.
There's nothing that beats real world experience. So,
Absolutely. I
Man.
100% agree, which takes me back to whatever, like the freight stuff we had did earlier in our career versus, some of
yes,
these guys that have been staring at screens since their private pilot certificate, moved right into an autopilot at some regional without even,
yep,
they didn't have to do all that crazy, reciprocating engine middle of the night crap.
Totally, man.
yep.
Yeah, wow, this is really good info.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
You got any? You got anything else, Sean, that you think would
Well,
be?
I was just going to say, so now that you're at your awesome corporate job, one of the best pilot jobs in Cincinnati, do you ever see yourself maybe picking it back up again, becoming a DPE, the old man retirement job?
I don't know. I really thought I was going to do that when I left the FAA, but because of their changes in the requirements and stuff, I didn't meet them right off the bat. And
Gotcha.
so I don't know. I still I love instructing. I love helping people into aviation because it is a wonderful career. I have loved every second of it. When I was a kid, I was never around airplanes, but from the moment I could speak, my parents said I was going to be. If they asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I said a pilot, and I still can't believe that I am a pilot, and I absolutely love it. And so I think it's a great career. I always tell people beats working for a living. I
Exactly.
did 10 years with the FAA, which was a lot of cubicle, a lot of on the computer, and that's no, I just can't take that anymore. I love being out and about, and, seeing the world. So,
I think you're sitting in an island right now on the Florida Keys, right?
Yeah.
that's right. I am. Yep. As soon as we're done, I'm heading to the beach to read my book.
That's awesome.
Float on a pool noodle. But yeah, I could see myself getting back into it. So
Awesome.
I love it.
So just to kind of get some inspiration to the new viewers, I think what you're saying is that the new guys, that even though you and I and all three of us came up in very challenging times for aviation, relatively speaking to right now, even with these proposed possible slowdowns in hiring and all that stuff, nothing in comparison to what all three of us went through. And I know everybody knows Sean and I's opinion, and it sounds like yours is the same, that no matter what, looking back on the career, it was so much fun. Even with the valleys where you were laid off and you had to find another job quickly, and it wasn't the job that you wanted, and maybe it was you wouldn't trade any of it, would you?
No, absolutely not. Not a second of it. And we're not the first ones to have a tough time. I remember when I was flying for the airlines and talking to guys at the airlines, and sometimes I'd jump seat and be talking to the Northwest guys or the Delta guys that had been there for 30 years plus. They had it hard too. They had ups and downs, peaks and valleys. I remember talking to one guy when I was getting laid off from Saba. He's like, don't worry about it, because I've been laid off 5 times. Yep. It all comes back. It does. Don't panic. This is the world we live in. It's always going to be ups and downs.
They're absolutely right. I have an uncle and an older uncle and 2 older cousins that they're the uncle's retired from the airlines. The cousins are both at JetBlue now, captains of JetBlue. But from the beginning of time, it's been cyclical. It's always been ups and downs. And we had caught one of the down things, but right before, in the early 80s, there was another down cycle with the economy.
Yep.
And, but make no mistake, this is a great time to get into it.
Awesome.
And it's like a roller coaster. It's down, it'll come back up.
Yep.
So.
Awesome. Great. Well, Ben, we really appreciate it. And I know the viewers appreciate it. I can already tell this is going to be a very popular video for us, because it's just a lot of great information. And it really says a lot that you're willing to come on here and kind of talk from your perspective just to help people. So you're a good friend, and I really appreciate you coming on.
No problem. I appreciate you guys having me. I love doing this. So anytime.
And if you have a question you'd like us to answer here on the podcast, you can always email us at podcast@ProPilotPlaybook. Thanks for joining us, folks. We'll see you next week.